G'day, welcome to the Financial Bloke Podcast, the podcast for people seeking the wisdom needed to grow their family's wealth and live a happier, healthier and more prosperous life. My name's Ben Law and I am the Financial Bloke. Last night our Treasurer delivered the federal budget and we're expecting an election in the next couple of months. So the government's in a really tough position as they have to balance a fine line between spending money to buy votes and being responsible with the economy and also our money long term. And it's important to remember that the money that the government's spending isn't the government's money, it's the taxpayers, it's our money. So we should want them to be responsible. So to talk today about the budget, we've got Jeremy Wicht from SW Accountants and Advisors, and we're going to analyse the components of the budget and what it means for those living in regional areas, including those on the land. So thanks for joining us, Jeremy.
No worries, Ben.
Now, where I want to start off, Jeremy, is I'd like to frame this up a little bit because it's very interesting times at the moment, especially economically. And as you know, I've got an economics background, so this sort of stuff interests me. But where we're at the moment is the government has record levels of debt and they've got record deficits. And I think from last night watching the budget's about 87 billion. We're going backwards at the moment. I think we're heading up to $1 trillion in debt shortly, and that's just the federal debt, not the states and the local governments as well on top of that. So that's what I think it's $1 million is the number. Inflation's starting to spike. And what I mean by inflation is food's going up, electricity's going up, fuel, insurance, etc. And for business owners and especially farmers, input prices like fuel, fertilizer and Roundup have all ballooned. And that's all going to have a flow-on effect from the economy and cause more inflation. And when there's inflation, there ends up being interest rate rises. And we've already seen it happen over in the US now. I think we've seen New Zealand and a few other countries start to raise interest rates quite aggressively. So we know they're going to go up at some stage, and it's probably going to be before the end of the year. Now, the government knows that the more they spend, the more that will impact inflation, which is not a good thing. So I'm actually really happy if they don't spend too much money and we start spending within our means. But to start off with, Jeremy, can you give me a bit of a sense, mate, on how you think the budget looks, let's just say at first glance?
Ben, at first glance, you're quite right. The government was in a difficult position in that they're already running record deficits and they've racked up an awful lot of debt through the COVID years. So they're sort of damned if they do and damned if they don't. Overlay that, the fact that this is an election budget, and so that they are preparing the groundwork for an election campaign to unfold over the next month or two. So they wanted to keep spending, but at the same time they knew fiscally it was not the responsible thing to ramp up the taps any more than they already have.
And that's interesting in America too, Jeremy. I mean, they were talking about spending $3 or $4 trillion in America this year, and inflation over there has just got out of control. And I think that's a very good indicator of where things go if the government just spends. And I think this budget's still got a lot of spending in it, but it's quite interesting where it's being spent. And it looks to me like it's not just being given away, it's being invested in certain areas.
Absolutely. The government's been quite canny in where they've spent their money. And it's actually, I suppose, because it is an election budget, it has been quite targeted towards infrastructure spending and also agri. So those two sectors have been benefactors from this budget. Are we going to do, leaps and bounds over things? No, we're not, because the things that have been tagged, for instance, infrastructure spending on dams and water, are very targeted things designed to improve the productive capacity of the land. Now, typically those things take many years to come to fruition, and given we've got an election in 6 to 8 weeks' time, whether those things get built or not, we'll wait to see. But you can see their priorities have been around enhancing the productive capacity of our key strengths, agri and mining.
Mm. And then it's interesting looking at the economy, some of the numbers they gave out about unemployment. I mean, they were talking about getting down into the threes. I mean, that hasn't happened in, well, I suppose the technical term is in donkey's years, has it?
Absolutely. And in fact, when you and I were going through school, sort of 5% was considered structural full employment, given the fact that you'd be expected at any particular given time the workforce to be changing around by about 5% per year. So we're talking into 3.5%, I think, in the forward estimates. That's almost unheard of, and that just adds to the pressure around inflation, and in particular, wage increases and the push for wage increases.
Yeah, and that becomes it's a positive and a negative, isn't it? Wage increases, because with inflation, people's purchasing power or what they can buy with their money is going down. So you want their wages to keep up with that inflation. But if wages keep going up, that means the input costs for businesses are going to go up as well, which means that then the cost of goods go up, and it becomes this real negative feedback loop through the system. And it's a delicate balance to make sure that wages keep up, but don't end up putting too much pressure on the inflationary rate.
Correct. And, I know you've got an economics background, and that all points to the fact that we have too much money chasing too few goods and services. So what happens is the value of the money falls, which on the other side means the value of the goods and services increases. So the only way to counter that is increasing interest rates, or, heaven forbid, increasing taxation that takes money out of the system.
And I think that's going to be the next thing, is once we settle down economically, is there's going to have to be talks about reducing government expenditure in certain areas to try and balance the budget. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to realise that the simplest way to balance your own budget is to increase what you earn and decrease what you spend. And it's no different for a government. They're going to have to get to that stage. And I think they were saying, how long was it? I mean, was it 87 billion? I think we're in the red, which is not a good thing necessarily. How long before the government's predicting they'll get back to almost break even, or at least recovering, not just going into debt every year?
There was nothing in the budget last night to talk about balancing the budget.
Yep.
Absolutely not. In fact, the talk last night was around, it's not as bad as what we thought it was going to be. They're talking about a projected budget deficit of 1.6% of GDP by 25-26, falling to 0.7% by the end of the medium term, which is, at the end of 2026. Nowhere near balancing the budget. In fact, net debt continues to increase over the forward estimates. Currently 692 through to can't read that.
That's okay. I need glasses to read things up close now too, mate.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but we're talking about getting up to about $1 trillion within the next number of years, aren't we? I think I read somewhere it was like 800 billion now.
Yeah, so it's 817 billion gross debt, 592 net debt. What's more shocking is, and probably lays in stark contrast to what we're talking about, in terms of percent of GDP. So at the moment, it's 39.5% of our GDP gross debt, just under 30% net debt. That grows to the end of 25-26, 44% gross debt, 33% net debt. So that's extraordinary numbers. And considering it's, allegedly a coalition government, they're quite amazing numbers to see.
They are, and I think we're in extraordinary times with COVID, and it's been and what's going on overseas. It's been a real tough choice for them. But I think what it tells me, Jeremy, is we've seen in the past splashing around a whole heap of cash. So when things go wrong, we just give away money to people with bonuses and all this sort of stuff, cash in the hand. And it's been designed to try and stimulate the economy, et cetera. I think we're going to go through a cycle where eventually we're going to have to tighten our belt, and there's going to have to be more fiscally responsible. And there's very good arguments for not doing it now, because as we're coming out of COVID, we want the economy to recover and do well going forward. But at full employment, it's really hard to justify any others. So Jeremy, what are the key points, I suppose, a couple of the key points for mums and dads, shall we say, or personally, that we should be looking at in the budget which have an impact on us?
Absolutely. The Treasurer was very keen to stress cost of living relief last night. So these kitchen table issues that affect you, me, and everyone out there. The headline act, if you like, was a 50% reduction in the fuel excise. So gasoline and diesel drops down from 44 cents a litre down to 22.1 cents per litre. The fuel tax credits, by the way, for our agri listeners, reduced by the same rate. So there's no profiteering to be had in that regard.
So that'll reduce it by 22 cents per litre approximately at the Bowser. And obviously they've got the consumer watchdog watching very, very very closely, because they're not going to want to see the fuel or oil companies actually taking advantage of this, are they?
Absolutely. And it's interesting, last night they were at pains to point out that it'll take 2 weeks to work through the system.
Up to 2 weeks, they said, yeah.
I filled up this morning and it hadn't kicked in yet, so we'll wait and see.
And so also too, what about there was some offsets as well, some tax, I suppose you say, and I hesitate to call them refunds, but credits, aren't there, under the low to middle income rates?
That's right. So the low to middle income tax offset, which you get when you lodge your tax return, so it won't even affect you immediately. You won't see it immediately in your pay packets. But there's a one-off cost of living increase for low and middle income earners from 1 July this year of $420. Now that doesn't sound like an awful lot considering what we're talking about, but also the low and middle income tax offset has been extended for another year. There's also some targeted relief for pensioners in terms of one-off tax-exempt bonus payment of $250. And there's also some small relief for small businesses out there in that your pay-as-you-go instalments, the equivalent of provisional tax, will be uplifted or calculated on an uplift factor of 2% rather than 10%, which was previously legislated.
Yep. Okay. And so that low to middle income tax offset is essentially for anyone under what income level, Jeremy?
Yeah, so it shades in, but basically anyone under earning under $126,000. Yep.
So essentially with the one that was in the past that they could have cancelled, but they've kept going, and then plus the uplift, it's about $1,500 per personal, and for a double income family or a 2-income household could be up to $3,000 as long as you're under those thresholds.
Correct.
Yeah. So again, it's not that's a significant amount of money if you've got that coming into your bank account when you do your tax return. But the cost of living's probably gone up in a lot of places, a lot more than that over the year.
Absolutely. So no doubt I'll see a rush of personal tax returns lodged shortly after 1 July, which is fine and understandable. But yeah, for anyone expecting day-to-day relief, they'll be surely disappointed.
Yeah, and if anyone out there is looking at got kids coming through, say, that are looking at doing apprenticeships, there's a little bit of a stimulus there, isn't it, for young apprentices in certain industries?
Yeah, correct. So the government has rejigged their apprentice incentives to provide subsidies to businesses in targeted businesses or professions to subsidise apprenticeship wages. Now, the interesting thing is there that the government last night pointed out it was in target industries, but they didn't specify what were those target industries. So hopefully that includes the agri sector and possibly some hospitality as well.
Did they mention carpenters? Because I saw something about mentioning carpenters. Was that given as an example, was it?
It was given an example. Let's hope so. We've all had difficulty trying to find tradespeople to build things for us. So hopefully that kicks in.
Yep, and also the apprentices get a little bit of a stimulus as well. So if you take on an apprenticeship, there was a $5,000 payment, wasn't there, to be able to get them to help subsidise their, generally for apprentices, lower wages.
That's right, and that's a real incentive for younger Australians to take up apprenticeships. Wait and see. Bring it on is all I can say. You don't need a university degree earn decent money, that's for sure.
Yeah, excellent. And now for business owners, I mean, I noticed they're looking at spending a lot of money on the technology or in investment boosts. What's that look like, Jeremy?
Yeah, so the government's quite concerned about cybersecurity, and as well as keen to encourage the digital economy. So the government's introduced a small business technology boost, which will provide an extra tax deduction, effectively, an extra 20% over and above what you spend to help you implement cybersecurity, upskill your employees, implement things like e-invoicing, so really embracing the digitisation of your businesses. That together with another incentive that they've announced around the small business skills package. Again, another 20% tax deduction over and above what you spend. So you get 120% tax deduction for expenditure on upskilling your employees.
And just to be really clear, because this is where people get confused a lot, is it's not a tax refund, it's a tax deduction. So if you spend $100, you get to claim $100 of tax deduction. Whatever tax you would have paid on that, that's what you save. So if you're on the 30 cents in the dollar tax, you might get back 35 cents in every dollar you spend.
Yeah, and the real subsidy here is the fact that it's 120% tax deduction. So the giveaway, if you like, by the government is the 20% extra, which may help you. But if obviously you're losing money, then it's going to be parked there, assuming you can find another day.
Yeah, because I think that's a really important one, because with what's going on in Russia and Ukraine, it's on all the media outlets about cybersecurity and how there's problems there and small businesses are being targeted. So I think it's a really good opportunity for anyone that does run a business and does have anything linked to the internet, which you'd have to be, a hunter and gatherer not to be linked to the internet these days for your stuff. I think it's a really good opportunity for people to get out there and start to protect themselves, because that's probably their biggest risk. It's not someone coming on farm or in your business now and stealing your stuff. It's going in online and wreaking havoc. Absolutely.
And the government's also taken the matter seriously in basically doubling funding to the Australian Signals Directorate.
Yep.
And also initiating the biggest expansion of that body through hiring coders, computer programmers, specifically around cybersecurity threats, not only to government, but also to the Australian economy at large.
And there was also some training as well, wasn't there? They were focusing on not only with the technology boost, there was also a little bit of training there for their employees, if you've got employees to be able to pay for training.
Yeah, so that's the skills and training boost, which, similar to the technology side of things, is 120% tax deduction. For upskilling your employees, and not necessarily in technology either, which is interesting.
But it has to be, I noticed, an external training organisation. It can't be internal training you do. And I look at it that if the unemployment rate is going to be so low, it's going to be hard to get good employees. So this could be a good way for businesses in any way, shape or form to provide additional external training to people and then get some tax benefits for it to attract those people.
Absolutely. And in this COVID-safe environment, that feeds right into online training and on-demand training for your employees.
And Jeremy, I also noticed there's a big chunk of money, I think it was almost $500 million going into the biodiversity and biosecurity measures. So there seems to be a real focus on protecting our agricultural industry, and then also through the infrastructure and regional communities package. So I heard, and I don't know how accurate this is, so I'll say it anyhow, but part of the negotiation between the Nationals and the Liberals was to get more spending in the regional areas. And I really got a sense that they were really focused on trying to spend some money. They mentioned Far North Queensland, Central Queensland. They talked about the Pilbara. They talked about the Northern Territory. They talked about the inland rail lines, roads. There seems to be a real focus on trying to invest back into those regional areas. Is that the sense you got? And where do you think that are the key areas that we should be taking notice of?
Yeah, absolutely. So they flagged $7.1 billion for transformative infrastructure in projects in 4 key regions, which off the top of my head were the Hunter, the Pilbara, and North and Central Queensland. So yay for Queensland there. And they also committed $17.9 billion for priority road and rail infrastructure, which is fantastic. No doubt that includes inland rail, but also upgrading some major freight routes as well, and a $2 billion regional accelerator program to drive growth and productivity in regional areas. So regional has done quite well out of this budget. But again, it's targeted spending on things that will hopefully improve the productive capacity of the country.
Yeah. And the trade-off, I believe, was said that between Scott Morrison and the Nationals was the fact that we got to spend this money, but then they signed off on doing the net zero carbon. And so there's been a trade-off there. So hopefully this will significantly grow the productivity of the regional areas. And they mentioned that a couple of times. Like they said, we want to grow the productivity and we want to, what did they call it, emerging areas? Was it, Jeremy? Was that the words they used? Do you remember the emerging or the I can't remember the words they used, but it was something like that.
I can't remember the buzzwords either, but if you think the Hunter, the Pilbara, North and Central Queensland, they're all pretty heavy mining areas.
Yeah, yep. I also noticed too, there was a future drought fund. I think it was 172 million, Jeremy, which is obviously about, and that's about not just providing drought funding, it's talking about drought resilience initiatives.
Yeah, interesting. In both the budget, they were talking about flood relief expenditure as well as drought mitigation. So it just goes to show we're a land of droughts and flooding rains at the same time.
But it's good to see they're putting funding into those areas, especially around the resilience area, rather than just trying to fix problems when they happen.
Absolutely, and hopefully the targeted transformative infrastructure programs around dams will go a long way in that regard as well.
And what about the small business write-offs, Jeremy? So, during COVID, they allowed us to buy plant and equipment, shall we say, so cars, tractors, and immediately write off those costs in 1 year and get a tax deduction for it. Has that continued or changed?
Yeah, well, no new announcements in this budget, so it continues as before.
When does it end?
Mate, let me just...
Because I think it would, and my personal opinion, Jeremy, is it'll probably be aimed to be ended at this end of financial year, and then they, depending on how the economy is going, will probably reinstate it for another period of time.
Yeah, so they brought in temporary full... they changed the name of it into temporary full expensing.
But the big issue there is people actually being able to buy plant and equipment, isn't it? I mean, I heard someone the other day say they went to buy a new car and they said it's a 12-month wait. So that's a major problem for people anyhow.
Yeah, absolutely. So the temporary full expensing finishes 30 June 2023, which obviously if you order a vehicle now, you may well be waiting 12 months to get. So, yeah, get in there and order them now.
And there's also, I noticed too, Jeremy, the market access and trade part for the agricultural markets, which I think is good. It's talking about giving money to help support food and agriculture exporters to maintain and diversify and expand their export markets. I mean, I'm guessing that's sort of coming off the fact that we're seeing significant disruptions in, the European markets, but also the issues we've been having with China. Today's episode is brought to you by AgriCoach. You've worked bloody hard over the years and you've built a solid operation. But as your children grow up and start their own journeys, you're beginning to think about the next 5, 10, and even 15 years and how to keep driving the business forward and ensure a smooth and successful succession plan. Preparing the business, preparing the next generation, and preparing for your eventual retirement all requires a solid plan and a proven process. Unsure about the right steps to take? Head on over to agricoach.com.au/webinar to learn more about our Succession Proof Your Family webinar. AgriCoach, aligning families, growing wealth, and protecting legacies. And now, let's get back to the episode.
Yeah, so they've cleverly, without mentioning any names, pointed towards diversification markets for agriculture. So that's very much welcome expenditure. When coupled with the Australia-UK Free Trade Agreement, as well as other free trade agreements currently under negotiation, they're very well aware of the fact that we need to diversify where we sell our products.
Absolutely. And I think it's almost $100 million. That's a fair amount of money that's going to go out there to try and secure our markets and expand our markets. And I think we're in a great position at the moment because the world is so unstable, especially in many of the developing areas, that it could be an amazing opportunity for us, Australia, if we've got the money to be able to negotiate those opportunities better than it's been for a long time. Yep.
And to add to that, the government extended the patent box regime to projects in agriculture. So the patent box regime. Well, the patent box regime is basically an R&D tax offset regime to allow for or to encourage businesses to invest in practical technology-focused innovations in the agricultural sector. So anything that will lead to an eligible patent being registered can fit into this patent box regime.
That's a pretty important one because at the moment there's a lot of innovation going on, especially with automation, etc. So I think that would be a really anyone that's in the development space or trying to, I suppose, innovate is the word. That would be something they'd really want to look into.
Absolutely, and also clearly encouraging the agri sector to invest in green technologies and things like that. We heard the pre-budget announcement about carbon credit units being treated as primary production income as opposed to ordinary income. So that helps out farmers in terms of including it in their averaging income, and also allowing them to offset that with farm management deposits.
Yep, yeah, which is important. I mean, you shouldn't underestimate the value of being able to include it as agricultural income, not just off-farm income. And also, Jeremy, there's a bit of work, a bit of talk around water infrastructure. I mean, obviously that's really important to the ag space. What are they talking about there? And again, I'm very, very aware that these are just high-level suggestions they've given or recommendations. What are they sort of talking about? Is it building new dams? Is it giving people money to be more efficient? What are they highlighting at the moment?
Yeah, so they're highlighting water projects and infrastructure in the Murray-Darling Basin to enhance agricultural productivity. They're also talking about an investment into a national water grid fund. So $600 million for the Paradise Dam in Queensland, 5.4 on the Hills Gate Dam in some form or another, whether it's the original form or some other reduced capacity, and $300 million for a Darwin regional water supply. So they are making some pretty significant investments into water infrastructure.
But it'll be interesting. They still haven't gone all out and said we're going to do a major project, have they? They're sort of tweaking around the edges, and it looks like they're trying to get a number of projects up and running.
Yeah, and as you know, dams take a while to build. There's a lot of hurdles they need to go through. For instance, the Hills Gates Dam was originally part of the Bradfield scheme, and my understanding is the $5.4 million tagged here is for a Hells Gate dam, but nothing of the scale, the transformative scale that Bradfield had originally envisaged.
Yeah, excellent. So what's the next step with this, Jeremy? So this is what the government's come out. I think the opposition comes out and gives their rebuttal, and then this goes essentially to the election, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So it will be interesting to see what the opposition's budget reply speech contains, because what we clearly have here is a plan to enhance the productive capacity of Australia and encourage business in certain key areas to undertake projects in infrastructure, skills and training, and that sort of thing. So it'll be interesting to see exactly if there's any detail, shall we say, in the reply, because to me this is a very detailed budget, very targeted, and probably, given the budgetary constraints of where we are on debt and spending, it'll be interesting to see what the opposition says we can and cannot do without.
And I think it's very easy to pull a budget like this apart because there's not lots of freebies going out to people. There are lots when you dig into it. We've only just scratched the surface, but it's not significant. Like mums and dads wake up tomorrow and there's $2,000 in their bank account to buy votes. So it's very easy from the other side, whatever area of politics you're in, to say you should be spending more because most people are worried about today. And I think we've got into a very dangerous cycle in our community, shall I say, now, is people look at the budget and they think, what's in it for me right now? And especially in a voting year, it's like, well, what have I got? Has it benefited me? And therefore I'll vote based on that. And it's very easy for politicians to come out and say, wow, we'll give, I don't know, the pensioners a little bit more money or I don't know, business owners a little bit here, or cut some tax rates to buy votes. The problem is we need to start thinking like a bigger picture, like what are we going to be doing 10, 15 years from now? Is this the best thing for us long term? And I heard a great terminology a while ago, and I wrote a column on it in the Queensland Country Life a few months ago about intergenerational theft, because what we have to start remember is all this debt's got to be paid back. And the unfortunate part is that we as a community are overspending now, or have been for the last period of time. And there's various reasons and arguments for it, but eventually someone's going to have to pay it off. And the levels we're getting to is it's potentially our kids and our grandkids that are going to be paying it off. And what that means is when our kids and grandkids come along and start paying taxes, their taxes are going to be high, or their services are going to be lower because the government's not going to have the money at that stage. So I think it's important we have that conversation. Is it's not about what I get, what's good for a strong economy that can look after the disadvantaged and those that are doing it tough, not just giveaways all the time.
Absolutely. And your opening comments were very relevant in that this is not the government's money. The government has no money. It gets us either from us through current taxation or our children and grandchildren through deficits that need to be paid back.
And it's an important point very few people talk about. And I think it's something that as a community we should talk more about. So that's fantastic, Jeremy. That gives us a really sort of brief overview of things. Obviously, we're going to see a lot more of this in the media. We've got an election coming up. Well, it has to happen before end of financial year, so probably in the next 6 to 8 weeks. I'm going to put you on the spot, Jeremy. What do you think the date's going to be for the election?
May 14.
May 14.
Yeah. I'll bet you a beer on it. There you go.
Excellent. Just one.
Just one.
Excellent. Well, look, Jeremy, thank you so much for your time. Where can people find more about you and SW Accountants online, mate?
Okay. We have a dedicated section on our website with all the budget updates, together with fast facts to do with certain key industries that we look after, agri among them. So our website is www.sw-au.com. Alternately, feel free to check us out on the usual social media channels, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram.
Fantastic. Well, mate, I'll put those in the show notes. I know you've been up pretty much most of the night because you had to do a breakfast webinar this morning for a whole bunch of people online and you didn't get much sleep. So I really appreciate your time. It's fantastic. And I'll let you go home and pick the kids up from school and have a good night's sleep.
No worries. Thanks, Ben. Appreciate that.
I just want to take a moment to acknowledge Jeremy and the effort he put in. He was awake all night going through the budget and all the details and getting prepared for his the webinar he had to do this morning, the breakfast, and also for my podcast this afternoon. So I really appreciate the effort he put in. I know it would have been tough to get through it. Now, one other point that I wanted to bring up, which we didn't really touch on in the podcast, was the fact that agriculture is really the big winner in this budget. If you read through all the details, there's a lot of initiatives. There's a lot of money flowing into ag. There's no changes to superannuation that I could see. There's very little mention of the tourism industry or the resources sector or the manufacturing, but there's a lot of talk about ag in the regional areas. So that can only be good for the farming industries and also regional Australia. Now, if you're enjoying the podcast and are serious about building your wealth, why don't you consider joining our private Facebook group, The Financial Blokes Wealth and Wisdom? And I'd love it if you'd help a bloke out and share the podcast with your family and friends. I'd like you also, if you could, to subscribe and follow the podcast wherever you listen to the podcast. And reviews are really, really welcome because they help Apple and Spotify get the podcast out to more people, especially if they're 5 stars. And that's it for today. Thanks for investing your time. I'll see you in 2 weeks.